So, this is where we ended at last time. The Greeks down in southern Italy, which we did sort of rush through, so we can go over it real quick again. Where the only obstacle left in Italy was the Greek city of Tarentum, where they called upon the Hellenistic king Pyrrhus of Epirus, because again, at this point, the age of Alexander had ended, and there was the just Hellenistic kingdoms left. He rolled in with 25,000 troops and 20 elephants, which apparently the Roman legions were not good at dealing with. So he wiped out the Roman legions and then made his way into Sicily to try to fight the Carthaginians, which he did a pretty good job against. However, when the Romans pulled up behind him and he turned to fight the Romans as well, his campaign stalled out, and while he was pretty successful in his battles, he continued to lose men until he had to retreat from the war. This is where we get Pyrrhic victory, which is to say the battles were too costly in order to win the war, or a battle, you lose so many men or equipment or resources or whatever that if you keep winning, or how do they put it? If we keep winning like this, we're going to lose all our men. So by 275 BCE, Rome had taken pretty much all of Italy. There's still, bits of northern Italy, I guess, if we think about like modern day Italy. But when we think about Italy, we've got Rome, essentially at this point. So that's what we're looking at this point now. All right. Now on to what was their religion of war, essentially, and what caused them to expand the way they did, which was largely this idea of virtue and glory. Virtue, the pursuit of glory, pushes war-minded ethos. And once again, we're going to learn a little bit of Latin, and since Latin is so intrinsically tied to the English language, it won't be as difficult as the Greek I made you guys learn, so they should be able to keep up. We have virtus, which is to say virtue. Core of the aristocratic elite. Now, this isn't like what we would think of as virtue today, where, if somebody's virtuous, they're, good and kind and taking care of people. No, back then, the root word vir meant men, or man, rather. So it was closer to, like, virility than it was being virtuous. So it was closer to the idea of being manly, so manliness, as opposed to, again, this idea of someone being, morally good. Which to them it was kind of the same thing. If you were a proper man, you were therefore morally good. So we have a number of terms here. Gravitas was this idea of seriousness. Again, we've still used this word today. So if something has a degree of gravitas to it, it's serious. Constantia, firmness of purpose. We don't use Constantia too much. Well, I guess just like something being constant, I guess you could say. Disciplina, training, yeah, discipline. Industria, hard work, yeah. Pietas, reverence towards the gods, that's just piety. Which again isn't a word we use too much, but it's still very much a word in English. piety. Frugalatus, simplicity of life, being frugal, which again, maybe not in the last couple of years or decades, but it's a term, it's an English term today. Fides, trustworthiness or fidelity, which again, it's just a term. Now to go back to the virtue and glory, Gloria, which was glory, or more specifically, glorious fame. Now this wasn't just a way to yourself be famous, because that was seen as self-centered, but a way for your family to become more recognized, and it's seen as a sort of a way to achieve immortality, not literally, but for you to never be forgotten. You know, if you do this great thing and it causes your family to forever be elevated in Rome, you will be remembered as that ancestor who did this great thing that elevated this great family in Rome. Also, I don't remember if it's mentioned in the book. Oh no, but it is mentioned in the book. Let's see. Immortality was the ultimate prize. Yada yada yada. Jesus, is horrific. Right, and then also, the best way to achieve this Gloria was through victory in war, which led to more and more war in Rome, because you want to win this glory and victory for yourself and your family by extension. Polybius describes in fascinating detail the honor paid to aristocrats who died gloriously in battle. Their bodies were carried into the forum and propped up by the speaker's platform in the Senate as though they were about to listen to their praises being sung by a senator. The man's accomplishments and virtues were then described. The ritual created the impression that the man or his spirit was watching over the proceedings, enjoying the praise for his efforts on behalf of the Republic. When aristocratic males died, wax images of their faces were made. Great Roman families stored these death masks in cupboard shrines on important occasions, such as deaths of noble Romans in battle. Aristocrats donned the death mask of their relatives, dressed in the rank-appropriate togas, and marched in solemn procession to the Senate to listen to a speech made to a speech in the dead man's praise. On such occasions, the Senate was filled with the ghostly image of gloriously deceased of the Republic, who were its real guardians. So there was this weird freaking fascination with like dying in battle and being forever remembered, to the point that they would literally create these death masks of the dead Romans and wear them in these solemn occasions. So yeah, that was a thing. So I've got a little ahead of myself, or really, I mentioned this last time. That we had the Greeks, and then later with Alexander, with their pantheon as all-encompassing, and other religions were just like variations of their thing. So, you know, again, with when the Greeks went to, or specifically Alexander went to, Egypt, and it was like, oh, you're blessed by Ra, and he's like, okay, cool. You just mean Zeus. That's great, because that's the head god. That's exactly what I want to hear. With the Romans, it was sort of the same, but also, at least early on, they recognized that other people did worship other gods, but rather than being like, oh, we're going to subjugate these people and show them that our gods are supreme, they instead sought to appease all of the gods. So what they would do, obviously they would appease their own gods to make sure that their gods were cool with whatever conquest they were going to make. Then they would appeal to the gods of the city they were going to conquer and basically tell them, hey, the people in that city, they suck and they're not properly worshiping you. So what we're going to do is after we defeat them, we're going to take your stuff back to Rome and we're going to build you a proper shrine and we're going to properly treat you the way you should be treated. And essentially would get on the good side of the gods that were supposed to be protecting this other city. So without any gods protecting the other city and with all the gods on their side, how could the Romans fail? I mean, they've got all the angles covered. So yeah, it's a hell of a strategy. It's quite the strategy. So here we have the Greek gods and their Roman counterparts. Again, most of them are, we know them as the planets. Poseidon is Neptune, Hermes is Mercury, Ares is Mars, etc. Other ones, you've got Hera is Juno, which is just one of Jupiter's moons, if I remember right. Artemis is Diana, Athena is Minerva, Demeter is Ceres, that sort of thing. But yeah, some of these, I want to say some of these were like already Roman gods and they just kind of rolled the Greek gods into them. Some of these were just like renamed. It was a bit of a mix of both. It wasn't just they took the Greek pantheon and just rebranded it wholesale. Although I do still really like this. Connor, I think you want to see this one. Connor. I thought you might like that. It's the, there we go. That's how they got their pantheon. Yeah. Can I copy your homework? Yeah, just make sure it doesn't look the same. Especially Apollo and Apollon. What's that? Yeah. Yeah, well, that's fine. I mean, some of them were a little creative. Hephaestus, Vulcan, and that's where we get volcano, so that's neat. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much all of the planets. I mean, even Pluto, that was Hades. So yeah. All right. So, woo. On to Carthage real quick. So we've mentioned Carthage since like the early Greeks. Actually, I think we've mentioned Carthage since chapter 1. Um, it was a colony of the Phoenician city of Tyre. Tyre fell to multiple different empires at multiple different times. So basically, the Phoenician Empire was wiped out. However, Carthage was so far away that they were able to just become their own power. Because Carthage is like way out in the middle of North Africa, and Tyre is way over on south of Syria, I guess. It's like right. It's where all the everything is happening in the Middle East. So they were a major trading power. They fought against the Greeks and Etruscans. But for the most part, the Carthaginians and the Romans didn't really mess with each other. This was another case of Athens and Sparta where Carthage was for the most part a naval power, and Rome was for the most part a land-based power. Now, some ways they differed. Rome, for the most part, made its conquered people allies, which is to say they were still technically subjugated, but like, oh, well, you're our allies, and you have some level of independence, but you're still paying taxes. Carthage completely subjugated its enemies and made them into slaves. So when the Punic Wars were happening, there were often uprisings in Carthage against them. So they had trouble at home during the war. And then also, as I mentioned, I got ahead of myself, as I often do, Carthage was mostly about the sea, whereas Rome was all about land-based power. Really, Rome didn't have a navy to speak of. Not yet. They could sort of get their guys across the ocean. Not even the ocean, but, the Mediterranean Sea. But, between... They could get their guys from here to here without too much trouble. But, not from here to, say, here. There's a bit of a difference in southern Italy and Sicily, and Italy and Carthage. Whereas Carthage pretty much ran the Mediterranean Sea. Also, I should mention that the Punic Wars, that's an old Roman term that means Phoenician. So actually, even the name of the wars is an insult by the Romans to the Carthaginians. It's like if we went to war with, let's say the Cold War didn't stay cold. We went to drag out war with Russia. And let's just, for the sake of the world surviving, pretend like nukes weren't involved, even though I know that's the entire point of the Cold War. But let's just say we went to war with Russia, and Russia absolutely beat our asses. We were destroyed. And Russia called that war the English War. Because to Russia, we were just an English colony. Even though we had been independent of England for at least, 200 years at that point. But to add insult, they didn't even bother calling us the country we were. We were just, oh yeah, they're that English colony or whatever. Even though, as we're going to see, Carthage very nearly took down Rome. So, just FYI, even the name of the wars was a Roman insult to Carthage. Um, so after Pyrrhus of Epirus was kicked out of Sicily, um, it left the Carthaginians and the Romans in Sicily, and obviously they're not going to just hang around and, you know, have burgers. They fought. And Rome had no navy, but through sheer incompetence, a Carthaginian ship, like, well, I mean, it crashed on shore near a Roman patrol that managed to get their hands on it before the Carthaginian men on board could burn the ship so that they couldn't capture it. Well, they captured it, and within 2 months had reverse engineered it and built 60 quinqueremes, which were single-deck ships with 5 rows per oar, and 20 triremes, which were 3 banks of oars. The triremes are what we're most familiar with. The quinquereme were longer and had more dudes like per oar, but the trireme is what we're used to seeing, where it's got like the 3, just like 3 decks of dudes with oars. So then Rome took its new navy and went to battle against the Carthaginians, and they got the crap beat out of them, because they don't know anything about naval warfare. They only know how to fight on land. So if you only know how to fight on land and you have a boat, it doesn't mean you now know how to fight naval battles. So Rome created a device that allowed them to fight naval battles at sea. Got any kind of idea what sort of device this would be? I mean, by device, I mean it's, well, I guess device is the correct term. Just how yes. It wasn't a ram. It was basically a big gangplank. They did have rams, as you can see. But yeah, it was this. They would pull up beside a ship and drop this sucker down, and it had a hook on the end, and that would slam down into the deck of an enemy ship, and then they couldn't get it off, and then they just run a group of dudes across, and then they would fight on the deck of the enemy ship. And now that was technically a land battle, and the Romans were good at that. It was called the corvus, like the beak of a raven, because of the little hook here was like a raven's beak. We lowered the deck of an enemy ship, form a bridge that soldiers could use to run across and fight the enemy. I lost what? Crew. I couldn't remember the word crew. Fight the enemy crew. And Romans were good at that. So, yeah, this was a major advancement for the Romans. But yeah, rams were already pretty common, but this was the next step, which is pretty rad. And as you can see, this is a trireme, so it's got the 3 rows of oars. So you've got just a bunch of dudes rowing all at once. All right. So, I'm trying to remember if it was around this time or if it was a little bit later. But there were a number of Roman senators who were basically financially incentivized to call for the complete destruction of Carthage. I don't remember the names of them. I know there was one in particular, but like he basically would end every speech he gave with "and Carthage must be destroyed." Yeah, it was the political discourse of the day. Was not only do we need to defeat Carthage in this war, but it needs to be destroyed. So by 255, Rome had wiped out most of the Carthaginian navy. They were landing troops in North Africa to destroy Carthage itself. So Carthage, which, as we said, didn't have the greatest land troops, had decided to hire the Spartan strategist, that guy's name, Xanthippus, who was not only a Spartan strategist, but he brought elephants in. And they whipped the Romans at the Battle of Carthage. So the Romans were not able to destroy Carthage like they had intended to. So for the next 13 years, the First Punic War was mostly confined to Sicily. So they were fighting largely on the island of Sicily, shipping troops back and forth. In 249, Rome lost 93 of its 120 ships in a horrible naval battle, which for a republic that didn't have a whole lot of a navy, losing 3/4 of your navy in a single battle is not good. Carthage then sent its greatest general to Sicily, but for some reason didn't send him enough supplies or equipment. And then within 5 years, Rome had to rebuild its navy and wiped out Carthage's fleet, which made it so that the forces in Sicily did not have adequate supplies at all. So they were literally starving in Sicily. So this led to the end of the First Punic War, where Carthage sued for peace, which would have been a pretty moderate, normal peace treaty, because these two powers were pretty much peers on the world stage. Rome had just been able to outmaneuver them. However, Rome broke the treaty, seized a bunch of Carthage's land, and demanded this huge indemnity, which is to say, Carthage would have to pay Rome a bunch of money, which was a problem because, actually, is it on this next one? No, get that in a second. Which was a problem because with most of its trading empire gone and paying all this money to Rome, Carthage spent 3 years quelling rebellions by its mercenary armies because, again, they didn't have much land power, so most of their armies were mercenaries. But with them having now lost most of their source of income and also having to pay all this money to Rome, they can't pay their mercenaries. And if they're not paying their mercenaries, the mercenaries aren't going to listen to them anymore. So now they're having to fight their own guys. While also basically paying Rome everything they've got. So this eventually led to our boy Hannibal. 218, Hannibal took Saguntum, which was the Spanish city that was allied with Rome, and began his way towards Italy. Now, the thing about marching to Italy from Spain is you have to cross the Alps, and the Alps are not a simple mountain range. This isn't going over the Smokies. The Alps are huge, very rocky, very cold. He had 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 elephants. Making his way across the Alps cut this in half. Although apparently most of the elephants made it through, even though they're African elephants, they're definitely not made for cold, but they made it pretty well. So his main goal was to get into northern Italy and win over Rome's allies, to get Rome's allies to turn against Rome and basically destroy Rome from the inside. This didn't fully work. There were a couple of Rome's allies who were tired of Rome and were willing to work with Hannibal. He was more successful with getting the various Gaelic tribes in the region to join up, because they obviously hated the Romans and were all about sticking a spear in some Roman loser. So by the time Hannibal got to like central Italy, about half of his force were Celts. Regardless, though, Hannibal kept winning. Anytime the Romans met him in battle, he crushed them. So Rome had to defeat Hannibal by not directly fighting him. They made their way to Syracuse in Spain, took it in 211, and then Spain by 207. Whoops. And then Scipio Africanus invaded northern Africa in 204, and Hannibal had to quickly make his way back to North Africa without his hardened troops, and was finally defeated at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE. So, like with the battle against the war against Pyrrhus, Rome continued to lose these battles, but they ended up winning the war because they just had so many dudes. They just had so many troops they could continue throwing at the problem that it didn't matter. It didn't matter how many guys they lost. They could just throw more, which is a hell of a thing because before class ends, I'm going to show a couple of videos about Hannibal, and in particular, these two battles, Lake Trasimene and the Battle of Cannae. Tens of thousands of Romans were killed. In the case of Cannae, I think it was like 50,000. As well as like a consul, because the way the Roman system worked, one consul stayed in Rome to do the political stuff, and the other consul led the armies to win all the glory, and they would swap. Well, the consul leading the army to win all the glory got his ass killed. Lake Trasimene and Cannae both were crushing defeats for Rome. So it wasn't just like these little skirmishes and Rome lost like 300 dudes. They were losing thousands of guys per battle. Here is strategy and tactics, the Punic Wars. So you've got Hannibal and crew making their way across the Alps, or specifically across the river here. Alright. Honestly, we're almost done with the chapter, so I'm just going to clean this up and then we'll do the video and be done. So they declared war against Philip V of Greater Macedonia in 200 BCE. This was the Second Macedonian War. Apparently that was the first one. The book didn't bother going into it, so we're not going to worry about it. It lasted about 4 years. Flaminius defeated the Macedonian phalanx at the Battle of Cynocephalae. Now they allowed Philip to keep Macedonia, but he had to give Rome mainland Greece, because again, just like what we'll see with the Renaissance later, the Romans were a bunch of freaking nerds, and they wanted to have Greece as their holding because blah blah blah, cradle of civilization, yada yada yada. 196, Antiochus, I don't know, of the Seleucid kingdom invaded Thrace, and they tried to move on to Greece. Philip and the Macedonians defeated him at Thermopylae on behalf of Rome. So Antiochus surrendered to the Romans, which left only the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt as a freestanding Hellenistic kingdom. So very quickly, in the course of that's 200 BC to 188, so that's 12 years. That's not a lot. That doesn't, again, grand scheme of things, that's not a lot of time. I mean, they spent more time fighting just in Sicily in the First Punic War, but now they've got not necessarily control over all of this, but this is now no longer its own empire. It's whatever Rome wants it to be. Obviously, the Greeks were going to be Greeks. Philip's heir Perseus tried to get a middle ground where he'd get some of Macedonia's independence back, but still work with Rome. This led to the Third Macedonian War, which lasted a few years, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And Macedonia was turned into a Roman province, which is to say, Macedonia had no independence. And the other nearby territories also became Roman provinces, so they were now completely under Roman control, rather than being like, hey, do as we say, and we'll leave you alone, for the most part. And now it's like, hey, you're now honorary Roman citizens, which is to say you don't vote, but you have to pay taxes. 168, Antiochus IV of the Seleucid kingdom invaded Egypt. This one in particular, this is in the book, I think. Hold on, here we are. All right. Antiochus IV invaded Egypt, which was partially protected by Rome. The Roman Senate sent him an ultimatum to withdraw at once. He asked for time to consider his excuse me. He asked for time to consider his options, but the Roman general Polybius drew a line with his walking stick around the king and demanded to receive his answer before he left the circle. It's like, all right, you can have all the time you want, but you got to be in this circle, or we'll consider it an act of war, which is a hell of a move. So he capitulated. The Seleucid kingdom is now a Roman province, and still sort of technically, Egypt is still kind of independent. It won't be fully under Roman control until like Caesar, but it's still being interfered with by the Romans. So Carthage is gone. Supposedly they salted the land so that nothing could ever grow there, but I mean, you can go to where Carthage was today. They built a city on top of it, and there's thriving agriculture there. So, like, apparently the Romans were just talking big. Because literally, if you do, quote, salt the land, it will make it impossible to grow stuff there. That's why, like, coastal flooding is so bad. Like, if the seawater floods way far inland, it's bad. Because it will make it so stuff just can't grow there anymore. So yeah, Rome was the economy in the Mediterranean. We're basically at the point where the Mediterranean is, as historians like to say, the Mediterranean was a Roman lake. It was completely surrounded by Roman territory. It was completely dominated by Roman coinage, which went from bronze to silver after the Second Punic War. Delos was opened as a free trade city, so there was no import or export taxes, so goods were brought in from all over the world through Delos, which meant that these eastern provinces suddenly became really, really important, which is going to be an issue a little bit later. Yeah, these taxes in the eastern provinces are making more money than everywhere else in Rome, the north, the south, and the west. So the Senate starts paying real close attention to the taxes being made in the east, which is why that's where Constantinople ends up, but we'll get there later. So here's some old Roman coins. Connor, one for you. So here's an old coin. You've got the heads and tails. Why does it got the two dudes there? I don't think so. But like, who would be like the head guy in Rome at this time? Or what was the head position in Rome at this time? The Roman Republic. This is before. No, it was before. This was when you had the consuls. Remember? So how many consuls were there? Fair enough. Okay. That's fine. I'm right there with you. Okay, so there were two consuls in Rome at any given time. Normally, before we start getting to the weird stuff a little bit later. So that's why it was this weird two-headed dude. The head of power was always two guys. So that's why it was this, because they were meant to like balance each other out. And then of course Tails is just like, we're really proud of our ships. Yeah. Now, also, that could maybe represent Romulus and Remus, but usually when they represent Romulus and Remus, it's like them as children with the wolf. All right, just a little bit more. So similar to what we saw with the Hellenization, with the spread of Alexander's kingdom and spreading Greek, with the expansion of the Roman, can't say Roman Empire, that's not there yet, Roman Republic, Latin became the official language. Which again, not the language that all the regular people spoke, but the language that was used by the officials, the upper class, merchants, that sort of thing. So if you wanted to get like a civil service job, if you wanted to get a job with the government, you needed to learn Latin. Of course, though, Latin pretty quickly spawned local variants. The so-called Romance languages is not because of the idea of like love romance, but of Rome romance. That's what romance means, is of Rome. Italian, Spanish, French, apparently also Portuguese and Romanian, I think, were the other two. There might be a third that I'm not remembering off the top of my head. Yeah, Romanian is apparently one of them. I didn't realize that because it's so far east, it didn't click. But yeah, that's one of the Latin-based languages. And the first true writers in Latin were Greeks. They had captured Greeks and brought them to Rome as slaves, but as learned slaves, as tutors for their children, as like, hey, smart Greek person that we have enslaved, your job is now to write plays for us to keep us entertained. That's your job. And okay, whatever. So the Greeks would often write comedies, which of course the Roman public were all about. Though when I mean comedies, I mean they were crude. So for example, unlike the Greek tragedies, which were meant to evoke some kind of introspection, about the place of man in the cosmos, or like, your city in the grand scheme of the other cities of Greece. Comedies were, again, not like modern comedies, but they were just feel good, sort of similar to modern comedies. But a lot of the times the scenes were obscene. They had stock characters, good-hearted prostitute, clever servant, shrewdish wife. Again, stock characters, we're used to that. We have Horace with Caesar Augustus. There was a story, just to use the one here, a man who tried to have sex with a girl who didn't show up for a date woke up the next morning with a mess. He apparently had dreamed about the girl who was supposed to have showed up for the date. Ha ha ha, that's highbrow Roman humor. And they would often satirize each other. Yeah, the Romans were real classy. All right, 146. The end of, well, getting towards the end of the Republic. Under the leadership of Corinth, the Achaean League rebelled against Rome. So Rome rolled in and wiped out Corinth. Corinth is no longer a city. It's completely destroyed. That's why you don't have, because, again, today you can go to Athens and see all the ruins in Athens. Corinth is gone. There's no ancient double walls in Corinth, or, the port in Corinth. Corinth is gone. It was destroyed in 146 BC. This year was also the end of the Third Punic War. 149 and 146 was much smaller, much less intense than the second. I don't think Hannibal even came. Hannibal lived, by the way, at the end of the Second Punic War. He moved to, I want to say it was like somewhere north of Greece, somewhere up in Macedonia, and I don't think he came back for the Third Punic War. Oh no, this was the one where the Roman senators were constantly saying that the city needs to be destroyed. Here we go. Cato the Elder liked to conclude his speeches to the Senate, no matter the topic, with the line, Delende est Carthago, which is to say, Carthage must be destroyed. The pretext that Carthage had broken its treaty, Rome declared war. So they basically just made some excuse to destroy Carthage. So yeah, I guess we're at, 133 will be the closest. We're not quite fully into like all of this yet, but we're over here now. We're getting further into northern Italy. We've got Greece and part of Turkey here, as well as Carthage now. So yeah, Rome is expanding and will continue to expand. It's going to be most of Europe by the time it's done. Sans like Central and Eastern Europe here. So yeah, that's it. That's also the conclusion. So obviously I will put this up on Blackboard and whatnot, and I will put the links to the videos up, because obviously I can't show the videos online because YouTube will eat me. So yeah, I'll just turn off the stream and post the links to the videos. Also we have next Monday and Tuesday off for fall break for Francis Marion, so we will definitely not be having a class on Monday, so don't be wondering where the video is next Monday, because I won't be here. Okay, see y'all next Wednesday.